good morning, depending the moment, to everyone. Okay, this class we are going to continue with the topic of migration, international migration. I really recommend because we already covered the main concept, the classification and categories of migration and migration flows in the previous class. So please, in that case, check also that class because has very important general concepts and general that. Today we will continue with the topic of international migration, focusing on the issues, the matters, not only the topic in a general view, also the complicated situation that is surrounding and cross-cutting the topic. The criticism, the critiques, the challenges, why nowadays we are saying that the migration is a global challenge. Okay? And of course, we will look at it from a case and specifically covering partially, because of time, a study case that is the refugee crisis or the migration crisis, migrant crisis in Europe, specifically highlighting mainly the case of the Mediterranean. Okay? Very important, as I mentioned before the classes, the categories that we already covered in the previous class. We examined the concept of migratory flows or migration flows to measure the relevance that these phenomena, multiple factors, multiple expressions and situations, depending the cost, depending the result, depending the origin, a lot of aspect that is multifactorial. Why this topic gain international relevance. Thus, the topic of migration has a significant importance in the projection and configuration of international relations, impacting political, economic, social, cultural, and also security levels. Very important nowadays, and from some decades ago, the migration as an essential topic, a crucial aspect in terms of design the not only international politics, specifically foreign policy. Remember, foreign policy is a national policy projected out of the borders to interact with other states and international actors. In that sense, it's very important how these topics get and was redimensioned, reconfigured to has an expansion. Okay, the concept of wall and a wall that is could be covered because of the evolution of and the new inventions and investigation about transport, communications, and technology make that expansion of the migration. As we have seen in previous classes, we live in an increasingly globalized world where distances have shortened and a global event have become tangible, accessible. In other times, to travel around the world was months and months, even a year. Nowadays, we are maybe speaking about hours. So the possibility to be right now at the moment in different places of the world is a very important aspect and such a conditional and such as enhancer in a way of the concept of migration. The human right of free movement is essential and very connected to this kind of possibilities to move around the world. According to that, it's very important that to remember migratory flows refer to the movement or displacement of people. Why not only the movement? Because we have different formats of migration. Not all of them are voluntary. Very important to remember. And also, we have two different situations, two different phases. One is the internal migration. Of course, it's migration, of course, has its relevance, but it's not our spotlight, it's not our focus. We are going to focus on international migration, which is crossing national borders from one state to another. That external or international migration is our focus because remember, our approach is from and according to the international relations study field. Okay, that's our area, that's our vision. It's not only statistical or it's not only demographic, it's not only geographical or, for example, economic. No, our approach incorporates many of those areas, many of those fields, but especially focus on the international relations. We address the topic through the figures of International Organization of Migration. Remember our subtopic, the topic we are covering, the way to cover, because it's a huge matter, is international or global governance. So the institutions, typically we've been covering tourism, we've been covering migration, we've been covering different topics or mandates, okay, that are part of the United Nations. And remember, United Nations has a international and specialized agencies to cover the different topics, different mandates. The main mandate and the focus on the main focus of in terms of organizations, institutions or agencies that cover migration are the International Organization for Migration and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Okay, not cover exactly the same. Remember, in the previous class, we develop more the case, the programs, and the activity of those institutions or those agencies. It's important that they assess the role of certain organization because it's not only these two ones. It's very important to remember that migration is connected with the international system of human rights. Because of that, the agenda, the programs, and the principles of United Nations are connected, are interconnected between different organizations. For example, we have the case of different organizations that we are going to see how the United Nations system of specialized agencies cover and focus on different programs in terms of migration, in terms of displacement, in terms of refugees, respectively. According to that, in this occasion, it's important to complement the previous class paying special attention to the effective capacity. It's not only the topic of, okay, this organization covered this activity and that's impact in migration. No, it's not only that, also is to assess the genuine capacity, effectiveness, the procedures, how the United Nations helps or not the process and the right now global challenge of migration flows. According to that, or migratory flows, according to that, it's important to see the capacity, the response, the management of the international community and its international organizations. How is doing, how is covering this aspect, this international topic, global challenge by the international organization, the global governance. The role of international solidarity, very important, not the same. International organizations, international solidarity. We will distinguish that, very important, because not only is not the same, actually right now, and especially in this topic, clearly not doing the same labor, not doing the same activities, and not the same impact. Very important to distinguish both in a subsidiary, especially the international solidarity, subsidiary and direct manner. Why, how is acting, why they are so required, and even nowadays collocates and change the position of the international solidarity in the global, in the international scheme, because the participation, the way they get into these international events by the international solidarity. Of course, disconnect capacity, response, effectiveness directly with the structural criticism. It's a critical approach about how is the reality and how the global governance, the international organizations are dealing, are managing the situation. Okay, we will look at all of these in a cross-cutting perspective, transversal, okay? Using a specific case, which is the Mediterranean, the European refugee and migrant crisis. Why? Because becomes a humanitarian crisis. To have that title change the perspective implies the need and the importance of the situation and why some actors are involved and some others no. What's the impact? What's the nowadays positions above the topic? According to that, we are going to make some specific emphasis over the Mediterranean situation. Okay. Important, as I mentioned, okay, the institutional framework on migration, the UN, the United Nations. Specifically, we will see some of the specialized agencies. Okay, for example, already mentioned the International of Migration and the High Commissioner, but also we have others that cover that are connected. If it's about the rights of children, clearly some children are migrants. And according to that, we need to defend, we need to protect, we need to guarantee the rights of those kids, children, teenagers, etc. Okay, so according to that, we can highlight the work and the connected sub-mandate. It's not the main mandate, but it's interconnected with the topic of migration. For example, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. As I mentioned before, migration, and specifically the migration crisis or the migrant crisis, refugee crisis, are so connected with humanitarian situations. Okay, the lack of human rights, the massive transgressions of human rights, the conflict areas, to run away of conflicts, armed conflicts, wars, etc. All of that is quite connected with humanitarian affairs. And because of that, this agency coordinates humanitarian responses in crisis situations. Although this is not its specific mandate, okay, it's not only about migration, but clearly includes people in emergencies. And people in emergencies, full vulnerability is so connected and so related to mass displacement, forced migration, refugees, and migrants in general. According to that, we also can include the United Nations Population Fund. Okay? It's a fund, it's an agency that is a fund. We also have a class, I think a couple of months ago, that we covered the different formats, different types of the by the legal nature of the different agencies. One is an organization, another one is an organism, another one is an entity, and some of them are funds. Funds has the capacity to collect money, like UNICEF, okay? And different financing and funds harvesting processes. According to that, and some independency in some way, of course, the United Nations Population Fund addresses broader issues, okay, related to population, reproductive health, and other matters, other rights connected to demographic aspects. Of course, mass displacement change the demography, change the human geography. That is very important in terms of manage statistical, but also in terms of rights of those people of those populations. If it's suddenly we have a diaspora, we have an exodus of 2 million people, clearly that change because of the countries that receive that people and also the country that they left. Okay, so according to that, it's very important in terms of population and managing population. So it incorporates some programs and areas that indirectly related to migration and displacement, especially in the field of health. How is the health guarantee to those migrants? How, if it's the lack of health, implies the risk and the hazards of pandemic, for example, or illness. According to that, it's very important the well-being of the displaced people arriving, but also during the process. Very important, we are speaking about human rights. Every human, all people. And because of that, they need to be guaranteed, protect, and promoted their rights. Even if they are migrants, of course, doesn't change the quality and the situation that you are a person, you are a human, okay? Very important. The vulnerability is increased during a migration process, and because of that, need to be guaranteed the rights. The United Nations Children's Fund, okay, similar to the population as a general, well, specifically some parts of the population by age, specifically children and teenagers. Okay, focusing on the protection and the well-being of children and teenagers clearly includes those in situation of migration, of displacement. Okay, because a lot of vulnerability, the right to learn, the right to have education, the right to live, the right to have freedom, the right to move, the right of a family, to be part of a family, to share your childhood with your parents. Those rights need to be guaranteed, and very common that they are under transgression or the lack of them during migration processes. Okay, so needs to be, and actually this is part of the Charter of Human Rights and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, so this is part of the activity of those agencies. Okay, also very important to bear in mind the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. As I mentioned, of course, a lot of time human rights, very, very important, presenting, of course, a proposal for a global compact. Remember the global compact and part of the ECOSOC, okay? The interaction for safe, orderly, and regular migration at 2018 in an intergovernmental conference on migration. What I'm telling you, of course, is a sort of picture, it's a sort of scenario in the global governance, international organizations situation. Of course, we need to contrast this on the national and what are the member states acting, saying, deciding, legislating in the internal sphere. This interconnection or lack of connection clearly shows the nowadays situation. And because of that, it's very important to bear in mind the situation, not only international and national disconnection, also the lack of effective interagency working, okay? The interagency work is essential because imagine we have a program in the UNICEF that is absolutely contradictory in the case of the United Nations Population Fund. It's a lack of money, it's a waste of money, it's a lack of effectiveness, is working in detrimental situation. Because of that, it's very important the interagency. But that is a very old time and very classical criticism above the specialized system, United Nations system of agencies, because some agencies are working in a way over the same topic, some other agencies are working different way, contradictory way, or even both doing the same action but not putting efforts together, working in a team. When they are in a way part of the same family, we can say, okay, the same nature. So that's very important in terms of the criticism above United Nations institutional framework. With that in terms and having a general perspective about a lot of international, not only the High Commissioner for Refugees or the International Organization for Migration, is more agencies, we should say, okay, it's a different actor, should be a general and quite able to cover the topic, a good coverage over the topic by the different institutions, especially if they work together. Of course, they are not working well together, first point, and is under the criticism, under the critiques, the effectiveness of the United Nations, especially in the topic of migration. Because of that, the big slogan, the big title, migration is a global challenge. It wasn't always a global challenge, okay? It's some decades ago that become and was considered a global challenge, and especially under the situation of not being able to cover, to manage it in a proper and effective way. So, indicating the spotlight on international and the United Nations system is very important to looking at this structure, multifocal, okay, different actors, different agencies, and broad institutional framework. According to that, it's pertinent to evaluate and to analyze because, of course, oh, no worries, migration is dealt by that organization and that's it. Hopefully it would be like that, but it wasn't. Okay, the real situation shows that not being very efficient. Okay, the effectiveness is exactly low. It's not efficient, and because of that, when we are saying, oh, this machine is not efficient, it's a product that is not well produced in a factory. But when we are saying that's a social, demographic, international, and even political topic is not efficiently managed, clearly shows a vulnerability. Implies people dying, implies people having not rights recognized, shows differences, breaches, fracture, fragmentation. This is not only a topic, okay? It's transversal to a lot of other topics because it's a gap between states. It's a fragmentation in the international relations, and that, of course, is part of the diplomatic relations. It's also part of a new agreement about not need to be about migration, but maybe about security, or maybe about commerce, or maybe about labor. Okay, so this. Distance, this topic of kind of impossible way to share and to understand the other in the position, okay, is not just a debate, it's an argument. And that situation clearly depicts the complex and complicated situation over the topic, especially in the international community. That fragmentation clearly weakened, okay, the international relations, the links, the relationships, especially the international cooperation. And in a coordination system like it was after the Second World War, the United Nations and the world proposal, okay, in terms of international community or global community, exemplifies and shows a weakness, a flaw, okay, a problem, a situation. That's actually nowadays the international methods are not covering and not being able to resolve. So clearly in that case, we'll have a sort of move out of the international perspective and more a national approach, which shows the various and diverse approaches over the international situation of migration. According to that, the international community made up of different states, okay, in managing migration flows. In particular, the upward trend in large exoduses or displacement caused by what? By armed conflicts, war conflicts, environmental migrants, okay? the lack of or the poor situation in developing countries, especially the lack of employment, okay? The very poor and very bad life conditions, like quality conditions. All that factors increase the exoduses, increase a mass migration. And because of that, especially humanitarian crisis, as we already saw, remember we already mentioned about armed conflicts, like the case of Syria, ethnic persecution, like the case of Myanmar, economic crisis or political crisis, like the case of Venezuela or Afghanistan, and of course, the European case. This is just a selection to shows, to exemplify, but there are many others, unfortunately. Okay, so we need to consider how we assess this situation, especially from especially addressing the response and the capacity in terms of actions by the United Nations system. First of all, the criticism of the United Nations system, and clearly in the case of the European Union, has arisen. Okay, the European Union is under the magnifying glass check because clearly it's a challenge, especially shows the fragmentation, the split over the different and very, very different positions, especially from the north, central north, west, central north, the situation of central, which is the east of the Central Europe, and the south, that's called the border states. Okay, so different and so different approaches, especially the double speech, the double discourse, and the double agenda. The first of all, in terms of institutional resolutions, response, etc., laws are low operational efficiency and low response capacity. Here we see a response to refugee crisis that is slow, ineffective. The emergency situations are not managed due to excessive bureaucracy and slow procedures. Okay, low operational effectiveness, and sometimes even using bureaucracy to as an obstacle. Okay, to make it lower and lower and slower the processes to be more inefficient. Okay, the clash of interests, okay, clearly are an impact and essential factors to condition the capacity and the efficacy. Insufficient funding. Of course, the international the international organization, regional or international, are so connected and so dependent, especially the autonomy and independency, with the funding, typically by the member states. If we say that the member states have very different positions, very different approaches over the migration as a topic, indicates that the funding, the decision making, the process of voting are so fractured. Because of that, it's a problem that's direct impediment faced by specialized organizations. Okay, so into the question of prioritization of financial resources and funds for migration. Also, we see from the 2000s the classical situation that, okay, not extra funding for migration, just minimum or barely not the main priority, and putting the fundings in another areas, which is another way to retire, to put aside the funds or the fundings to approach, to deal in a good way, good manner, migration. According to that, it's very important. This way, resources are used as an obstacle for management, okay, but also as a political tool, especially the main countries. Remember, we have a gravitational system, which is some countries has the capacity to influence. So they have what is explained in the vision, in the example on the vision of a planet, okay, with a gravitation forces. So they have another countries that are satellites, okay, and according to that, to use the funds, to use the economic power, to influence through the international organizations is a good way to slow down on and enforce in a way the or boost the exactly that the bureaucracy or the regulations, the norms to stop or to dissuade a good approach, a good resolution above migration. According to that, the fragmentation and the lack of coordination. Already I've been covering that idea, okay? The cooperation is essential in the draw, in the draft, in the idea of international community. If we have a gap, if we have a fracture, especially a one that is very hard to negotiate, to resolve, to deal with, like the case of migration, because it's a polarization of positions, indicates that the coordination is under division, segmentation, fragmentation, okay, which occurs between the UN agencies, of course, and because of that, the lack of interagency working, but also between regional organizations, for example, the European Union, leading to a lack of coordination and either overlapping or contradictory work, thus creating a lack of coherence in the implementation of programs, in the activities, in responding to the needs of migration. So even extra efforts for nothing, okay, or for not being very effective. Polarization of states. Due to the heavy demographic and dependence of global forums, especially in terms of resources and funding, also the participation of the states is essential. And given that, there are very conflicting positions on these issues, very separated approaches and foreign policies. Especially polarization arises, the division, okay, between states that support migrants' rights and also some state that has a direct opposite um, uh, position, okay? So some are pro-migrant or at least pro-rights of the migrants, and other ones is absolutely against migration, okay? And some others are between that scale, that bar. According to that, restrictive policy and outsourcing of migration control. So we have, of course, one approach, which is dealing with the causes in the origin, okay? We have a crisis in Syria. Well, how to help Syria, how to change the situation so that the Syrians don't need to migrate, okay, to have a good life quality. This is our approach about the causes to change the situation that produce migration, because migration is a result, is an output, is a consequence of a situation. If we deal with the situation in origin, the conditions change, the context change. Another position, especially anti-migrant position, is about, okay, focus the policy not on the migrants, on the borders, okay? It's called the securitization. So migration is not a humanitarian topic, it's not a humanitarian aspect, it's a security aspect or even security risk or hazard. Because of that, the same financial and political dependence we saw early is focused the funding, the connection with the agencies that they criticize. So United Nations sometimes, of course, need to be, or at least should be, acting pro-rights according to the human rights, because they are that is consecrated in the international instruments. treaties, conventions, international declarations, universals. So according to that, the lack of opposition and the restrictive migration policies, okay, against migration, of course, is a barrier, is an obstacle for the proper acting of the United Nations agencies. And also because of that, the national and the international are in conflict, are opposed. Okay, that's clearly indicates the situation that before I mentioned, a lot of agencies working in that way, but not very good results. Why they are not able to deal with the topic? Because of this structure. It's a systemic problem, a structural crisis, especially an institutional crisis. Okay, and because of that, is a criticism above the qual model of international organizations. In addition, the outsourcing of migration control from one region to other countries, as in the case of Libya and Turkey, or the case of US with Mexico, okay, European Union, especially control over Turkey or Libya because of the border, USA because of Mexico, implementing new policies that to move the border. If Mexico contains and deal with the migration, migrants didn't arrive to the US border. Okay, so this mechanic shows a a tendency that is especially detrimental. Detrimental in what area? To human rights, and leads to a profound questioning of global governance organizations. Some of the rectors and very imperative principle about human rights international system are being questioned or are even under a circumstance, under problematization because of this lack of effectiveness, but of course, lack of participation in something that was already declared, already consecrated as a general international law, part of the international public law. The criticism are structural, are systemic in nature, targeting the institutional models, of course, that have been implemented after the Second World War, after Bretton Woods and San Francisco Charter. So the institutional model is in question and also be summarized as a lack of effectiveness in the face of a growing global challenge. So migration becomes and is right now a global challenge because the main international actors in the international relations are unable to deal in a proper way with migration. Okay, it's covered as an issue, covered as a security problem, it's covered as a different way. And because of that, of course, this polarization is not among states, also inside of each of the states, among political parties, political campaigns, the population itself. Okay, this is so connected with the concept of division. And about challenges, it's very important to bear in mind that the plurality of factors I mentioned before, this is multifactorial, and even actors that aggravate the migration situation call into question several parameters of international cooperation. Cooperation, when you have a system and the system has a problem here, a gap, a breach, if you cannot cover that breach, interferes in all the cooperation system. And because of that, we are also approaching, not only because of this, but this is a factor, approaching the lack and the crisis of cooperation, the coordination. Why we are assisting a new regionalization, polarization, multipolar concept of the world. The geopolitics, of course, take part of this crisis, take part of this not way of getting a solution of the situation and metabolized it. Okay, it's part of this break, this crisis in terms of international organization, and is so connected with more and increasing escalation of armed conflicts, wars, tensions, etc., in international events. The proliferation of national highlighting is very important to highlight some aspects that is part of this lack of response and especially lack of cooperation, a crisis of cooperation, international cooperation. The proliferation of national and governmental rhetoric aimed at nationalism, opposed to migration, anti-migrant position, especially very important to highlight in the case of the European Union against their own and very typical principles that they already use to create the union. Okay, the recognition of rights, the Strasbourg approach about human rights. That, of course, is a rhetoric focused on xenophobia, on nationalism against the foreigner. Okay, become part of a political speeches and political campaigns, is part of the social polarization. This clearly leads to increased levels of violence, hatred, rejection against migrants. Such trends not due to reduced migration. It's not that way. More hatred is not producing a reduction of migration. No, generate a greater number and more statistics about irregular migration, irregularity, less integration, less inclusion, less being part. Those migrants are more vulnerable, are more under very hazards and very dangerous situations. That's on the contrary, that some people think is not okay. Dissuasion, okay? It's not okay. They avoid to migrate because it's not safe. No, this indicates that actually is a call into question of the international roles and the international organizations about how they promote in common forums dialogue, presence, interinstitutional and intergovernmental work, produce a good way to cover the different positions and to produce a common space to approach the topic. And especially these kind of tendencies produce more vulnerability, which includes the criminal. I will name now the organized crime. Immigration or foreigner policies. The immigration policies are moving to to the concept and the nature of securitization, about security. Okay, so above statements are not just rhetoric, but are also reflective in regulation aimed according to anti-immigration policies. Okay, many countries have tightened entries requirements, so very hard to have a visa, very hard to have residency. What we are covering: free movement rights, international right, free right to have a resident, free right to. We have a lot of rights that are being ignored, okay, that are not protected or not promoted, and increase the external controls of the borders, the external borders, created administrative and bureaucratic system that not only direct prevent migrants from entering, but also greatly, especially in giving refugee status or asylum status, complicate the work of international organizations and stop. It's a big obstacle. Policy as a tool for their positions, political positions, or political speeches. So the use, for example, the creation of refugee camps, the creation of detention centers, further criminalize migrants or deny their fundamental rights than actually get or produce a resolution of the topic. And that's what I mentioned before. That's a standard of securitization, criminalization of the migrants, and more vulnerability because less integration, more rejection and hatred produce a rise of the mafias, a rise of the actors that are linked to the organized crime. Okay, so the numbers, the vulnerability of the migrants in that is not a dissuasion, it's not a way that okay, migrants stop being migrants because they avoid the unsafe situation. No, not that way. On the contrary, is producing more need to migrate. And typically more irregular migration, especially a more vulnerable situation, a lack of protection. So because of that, led to an exponential increase in human trafficking, forced migration, slavery, labor relations based on slavery or forced work, children and teenagers forced work, and compel them to submit to criminal schemes and illegal activities. So it's a vicious cycle, okay? Increase the situation, and clearly some countries and species say, okay, they are criminal because they are connected to crime. That's not neat when it's a forced situation. And the last but not least, very important, the international solidarity. This is very, very important because our actors that are international actors, and their activities are focused on cover the places that the states avoid to cover. Okay, so many international and regional, and when I say international solidarity, I'm not speaking about international organizations. That is institutional global governance. This is NGOs, okay, international NGOs and organizations that have been forced to address or decided to address in a humanitarian situation about migration and refugee issues, giving to gaps, shortcomings, inefficiencies, the lack of capacity we see in intergovernmental, all the criticism we covered before clearly are so connected with this urgent need to effectively respond, try to respond. Many of those times, those NGOs are not funded by governments, just by private or different fundraising, and to try to deal with the humanitarian crisis. Very noticeable in the Mediterranean case. Okay, we see in the Lampedusa crisis, we see after the Vortex, the external borders after the Convention. We see during the 2000 to 2015, and also even nowadays. So some organizations like Doctors Without Borders guaranteeing the rescue of migrants working on ships like Aquarius or Geo Barents, and also support medical in all terms of health, medical and psychological care. Save the Children, participating in rescue operation and providing specialized supports, especially in medical care, but also support psychological health, educational activities, very important. A lot of time the migrants don't know the language, the culture, etc. Both in external operations and within refugee camps also. SOS Mediterranean, operating rescue ships, okay, with Aquarius, ocean biking, etc. Rescue mission to to help the migrants that are and to save the life of the migrants that are in the water in Mediterranean, especially. Proactiva Open Arms or Just Open Arms, protecting the dignity of the migrants, providing care. International Rescue Committee, providing migrants arrival of the countries, such as, and especially in the south, Greece, Italy, supporting integration, educational, because it's not just saving the life. You need to continue helping to be part of the community, being able to get a job, being able to be part of the community. Everything in every way, like another citizen, okay, to pay taxes, to have duties, to etc. It's a lot of aspects, okay? Psychological support, employment initiatives, Sea-Watch, okay, emergency assistance in rescue. Very important in the Mediterranean case, for example, the closing the ports by Salvini during the Salvini presidency. So the important approach that even governments is not just not covering the area, like moving out of these very essential points or areas to cover migration, even they are against. So they producing extra obstacles to don't let the international solidarity to work or to help. Refugee Rights Europe conducts research, documentation. We need numbers. Okay, we have different numbers. Even nowadays, we still hear the concept that international community is once again being questioned. And we have a sentence, an idiom that was by one of the Refugee Rights Europe, that Mediterranean Sea becomes the world's largest graveyard because the huge amount of people that lost their lives in there. Okay, so the inability to respond effectively to a global challenge, the criticism about current models. This is another aspect that includes to the system crisis. Okay, the international system crisis. It's not only a topic. This is not separated. This is integrated to a bigger situation that is under that concept of magnifying glass that clearly is not working. Okay, the world is not better. It's not more safe because of these policies. So over the last decade or 2 decades, the European Union continuing to deny migrants their rights, increasing securitization, and also promoting polarizing discourse. It's not the same the North, that is very selective decision about helping but not accepting. But we have the cases of Hungary or Poland that they cross the internal borders and say no to migrants. Or we have other situations like now externalization, the process of accepting migrants. This year was implemented that the Italy nowadays process approach over migrants, policy over migration, which is moving the migrants to a third states already pre-approved, says safe state is third states like for example Albania or Albania, Colombia, Morocco. Okay, so these clearly are based in the discourse that is dangerous, and the latest measure is transferring those migrants. So if we transfer migrants to a third state, those states are not member states of the European Union. So those migrants are very far away of the European Union or the original destination, but also in a situation that the policies, the laws are not the same of the European Union, especially the principle, the right of life, the right to freedom, etc., etc. The human rights are not need to be recognized, and because of that, is clearly against the original spirit and orientation of the fundamental orientation of the European Union. This highlights the essential participation, also the new actors in international sphere, international area, which is the international solidarity, and demonstrate the shortcomings of intergovernmental multilateralism. Okay, so we have a criticism about it. It's a challenge, a global challenge that is not being approached in the good way, more than the good way, in an effective way, because the situation continues. Okay, probably nobody has one option. It's not an easy topic. This is very hard, okay, and very big. This is a first contact, okay? As always, I recommend site bibliography to expand. It's a huge area, very wide scope. So anyone that has any interest, please go deeper in the topic because it's very, very important, and so important. If you have any proposal, any idea, please also include and implement in the assessment and evaluation. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any comment, any doubt, please, you can use the chat or raise your hand. Antonella?
Thank you, Gonzalo. You can go ahead soon too. We have at least 10 minutes of questions, so let's go ahead.
Yeah, indeed, very wonderful class. I would like only actually to thank Mr. Gonzalez for this class today again, to improve our knowledge. In
Thank you.
fact,
Me too.
about that situation of the immigration, they're very, very silent for outside in Africa. But we need is because this is the class of the older man, the master degree. We need to come with the exactly that the contribution of the BRICS in the United Nations Unions, the European Unions, United States of America, including the African Unions, the contribution of five or four blocks for about their situation. Because until now, the people continue to die. People continue to lose their lives at the states of Hormuz, Lampedusa. Moreover,
Perfect.
my question: we must make? We all are invited to make some important things. Thank you for your contribution.
Oh, thank you, Suntun. Absolutely, what you are mentioning is very, very important because, of course, the case of Hormuz, the case of Suez is more important as a very strategical and geostrategical points, especially about international commerce, international um, transport than how impacts over. Of course, all the intergovernmental organizations are under questioning. Why? Because European Union, but also the Organization of American States, but also United Nations, also the International Organization of Commerce or Trade, also the, for example, the African Union, okay, or even the Arab States Union. All those, of course, are not clearly focusing, are not dealing properly with the causes. Why some people need to migrate. Okay, we need to focus on the origin. Why? How we change that? If we are spending billions of dollars or euros about, okay, I need a huge fence. Instead of that, how we help? Why not developing help? Not debt, no credits, producing a real developing, okay, increasing economic growth, employment growth, okay, those real process. And of course, nowadays we are seeing some other perspective that not enough right now, and depending the situation at this topic. But again, we need some proposals,
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you. Let's go with Chiamancho.
Mhm.
Chiamancho, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, can you get me?
Yes,
All right, thank you very much for this very important topic concerning international migration and the challenges that migrants are having as they struggle to make their way into Europe in order to earn a living and better their lives and equally take care of their families back at home.
absolutely. Very important. I mean, many factors. In this case, I use the case of European case, but it's not to ignore the case of interregional migration from one country to the neighbor country. The fracture above the some parts of the family migrating, some part no. All that, of course, a huge topic, 1 hour, impossible to cover all, but yes, absolutely the fracture of the family and the right to have a family. Be careful. Yes.
What is the United Nations?
Sorry, I cannot hear.
Hello, can you get me? Get me?
I'm not sure if it's only me, but I cannot listen properly.
Oh my God, but I'm getting you.
Oh, there you're back. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. So I was saying that it is really a very serious issue which touches almost all the continents, because Europe,
Mhm.
as you can see, is a hub, a place where a lot of people aspire to go there and be able to have their dream life, and yet on a daily basis they keep facing challenges as they drown into the seas and die on a daily basis. So what is the United Nations, the European Union, and other unions which are of particular interest, and international organizations doing to protect the interests of migrants as their rights are being deprived on a daily basis?
Exactly. I mean, this lack of effectiveness directly impacts on the vulnerability, okay? The rights not being recognized, not being guaranteed, but in the case of the migrants. Because of that, uh, we have one thing that we say the official speech, which is protection, human rights, effectiveness, activities, programs to protect, to help, to guide, etc. But if we go for the reality, not just the paper, we go for the reality, clearly that's not happening or not at the level that is required. That is the criticism about the topic. Okay? When we have UNICEF, but we still have children being kidnapped, okay? Kids, so children or kids being kidnapped to using mines or different human trafficking, and they are in migration flows or they are part of migrants, clearly shows the vulnerability, the lack of effectiveness. Those are part of um, a speech, but not an effective way to protect. They have a lot of programs, some policies, but in the reality are not genuine. There's the problem. If you go, you browse, you will find a lot of programs about migration, about protection, about guaranteeing human rights. But on the other side, you have the European Parliament saying, okay, but we don't want to deal with migrants, so let's send them to third states, and they wait in detention camps until we see those authorities of another third countries decide if those migrants should enter or not. And it could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Not in the country the migrant want to go, not in the safe country, maybe not recognizing you are deprived of your freedom. So clearly, it's not what a lot of people think about it, especially the migrants, because this is important to consider how this is impacting in terms of all, not only the migration itself, especially in terms of humanitarian approach of the international community. What is happening about the principle of the world, okay? In the
Yeah,
international public law principle. Mhm.
yeah, because I think there is a lot happening on the ground. If you take a good look, you realize that in most of the third world countries, they have a lot of problems which have equally been, you know, which I think the European Union and other Western countries have contributed in making them to go through hardship. Take for instance, you cannot be a colonial master to a particular country,
Of course.
and and at the end of the day, there is nothing you are doing to help the people. You only can step in to take away their raw materials. In terms of the educational policies, you're not contributing anything tangible which can make the countries, to be stable economically and be able to stand on their own and do things. Those are some
Exactly.
of the problems which plunge people to travel because of economic hardship, unemployment, just to name a few. Low living standards, low income earning, and other like. In fact, at times they don't even have access to odd jobs to do and other like. Taking a good look into their GDP, since their productivity is very low, they are unable to carry out transactions and other like, and the value of the currency. Don't you think that the international organizations can try to make sure that they support these countries instead of borrowing them with money on a daily basis, they try to bring in programs which can make them to become more economically stable, be able to create employment for themselves in terms of technology and other aspects in order to curb this issue which is abusing human rights on a daily basis.
I mean, absolutely. But it's so connected with I already mentioned with Sun Tun in the previous comment, because it's going to and dealing and helping and a technical support for what? For the situation, the origin situation, to no need to migrate, how to get better. But this difference is about geopolitics. Geopolitics is based on gravitation, the influence. If one country has no more economic power, more best lifestyle, more political power, war power over other countries, it's no gravitation, it's not a difference. So that's lack of, or that's lack of equality, lack of similarity is essential to keep the difference and the capacity of one country above another. Okay, so you at some point you say something very important. You want they can try, yes, but they cannot, because the important part here is the creation and the format, the model of international organization is they are not independent, they are not autonomy, and because of that, the countries that are part of it in the decision making avoid the use of the international organizations as a promoters of equality and changing the original situation. This is important. When we think international organization, United Nations, etc., as an entity, an independent entity, that's our experience, almost all the academics and the scholars and the researching about the topic shows that no genuine independence.
So you see, that is where the problem lies, because at that particular juncture, there is a vacuum. There is a vacuum, which implies that if you're not very careful, that's the reason why the countries with strong economic power, political power, and all the like will continue to suppress those who are not up to anything. And at the end of the day, after depriving them, taking what belongs to them, they'll come back and just say that we are coming to give you some small grants, this, that, of which it is too mean. To be frank and honest, it's not really helping the people in any way. It's not really helping the people. So I think it is good that we should go deep into the root of this whole show, right into the top root, and try to correct certain things if we want to solve this problem as far as humanitarian crisis is concerned, with people who are trying to travel overseas to go and have their dream life simply because they are unable to achieve it in their own countries of origin.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
I think I'll end here for now. If there is any other thing, I think if the class could prolong, I'll have a lot to say. It's really a topic of interest.
Yes.
I wish
You.
if in a class of this sort, there is a possibility that some of the decision makers can listen to some of us, because I think as those who are concerned in academics, there are certain particular topics of interest which I think it's necessary that recommendations can be taken back, or some of these scholars or some of these people who are involved in decision making at this level in various organizations, particularly the United Nations, can have access to. Maybe it can help in shaping their policies. Who knows? There can be a change with time. I believe not everything goes unnoticed or fall on deaf ears. And I believe that as far as change is the only thing which is constant, with time, one or two things can change in policies, and definitely the world will be a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Che. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We run out of time, unfortunately. I hope you have a good year. So please take care. Bye bye.